Good morning. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm Jahan Biku, a Senior Professional Officer at ICLEI Africa. Very warm welcome to everyone. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to the conversation today around reframing and reclaiming road space in African cities. We've got some really great speakers lined up. So yes, I think, such an important topic and conversation that needs to be had, as we are all very much well aware, the current situation in many African cities is that of roads and streets that are really dominated by motorized transportation, from cars and trucks and buses and three-wheelers, and really leaving very little room for anyone else in any kinds of activities. And as a result, many cities are plagued with congestion and other road challenges, leading to increased greenhouse gas emissions, poor air quality, and a dire lack of road safety, all of which are contributing to public health and human rights issues in our cities. The good news is that our motorization rates are still very low compared to global standards. So we really do have a very good opportunity as we develop our cities to shift the way we move in our cities and to shift our thinking around this. Our streets and roads touch on so many aspects of urban life, from connecting people to jobs, to goods and services, to give them space for street trading, leisure, play, to socialize. And our mobility systems and urban planning, policy and implementation can really support these activities. So as we think about creating African cities that are people-centered, healthy and sustainable, it is important to reframe what roads mean for our cities and for people, to advocate the shift in our mobility systems and to change mindsets to reclaim these spaces. So for the next hour and a half, we'll have a conversation on how we can really make this happen in our cities. And yeah, I look forward to that. So this webinar does form part of African Mobility Month, which is a campaign that's convened annually by ICLEI Africa and many different partners. And it's really a platform to connect cities and urban mobility actors to share information and knowledge, as well as to inspire action by showcasing the many diverse and exciting mobility projects that are happening in our cities. So I will share in the chat with you in a bit how you can contribute to the campaign and how you can get involved. But I will now hand over to Olamide from the Lagos Urban Development Initiative, who will be leading the discussion today, and she will introduce the speakers as well. So Olamide, I will hand over to you.
Great, thank you, Jahan, and thanks for the introduction. So we're going to pretty much have 4 different panelists today, and they're going to introduce themselves and the work that they do around this topic of reclaiming and reframing what road spaces are used for and what they do, and how we're going to think about the future of road spaces in African cities. And then after that, they've done about 10 minutes each, we will then look at some photographs which we can analyze. And
Olamide, you just muted yourself.
So sorry, thank you. I hope you heard everything I said. So the first thing we'll have Sebler Samwell. I'm just going to do a quick one-line introduction, and I'm hoping that they will also kind of expand on this as well. So she's the co-founder and organizer of Menjed Lesser, an Ethiopian open streets movement. And I've known Sebler for quite a while, and she's doing a lot of stuff, even around fossil fuel proliferation. And so she's doing some really fantastic stuff in the African context, but also globally. So I'm going to hand over to Sebler now, who's going to do a quick introduction and also talk a little bit about her work. And Sebler, please feel free to share your screen as well, or photographs if you'd like to.
Okay, thank you so much, Olamide, and hello, everyone. Just to clarify, it's fossil fuel non-proliferation, not fossil fuel proliferation. We're trying, yeah. So I work as the Global Cities Campaign Lead for the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, and it's a campaign for a global just transition away from fossil fuels and towards equitable renewable energy systems. And I'm the co-founder and organizer of Mangalleso, as Olamide mentioned, which is the open streets movement in Ethiopia. And we have kind of a urban sustainability nonprofit called Lem Katama, which means urban bloom or flourishing city in Amharic. And it's all focused about urban sustainability in African cities. And we're based out of Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. We also have a campaign for plastic-free Ethiopia called Yazambil Mels. And I'll tell you about some of the other projects when I share my slides. So maybe I can do that actually now. Let's see. View full screen. Does that work for everyone? Even now?
Yes, it's just now it's not in full screen, so we can see the slides on the side.
That's fine.
The thumbnails, but yes, we can see it.
Okay. So great. So hi everyone. So I'm Sebler again, and I'm the co-founder of Mangalleso. It means streets for people in Amharic, and it's Ethiopia's open streets or car-free movement. And I know this movement is getting stronger every day, so we're really excited to see what does it look like when we put the majority of how people move in African cities, create space for them to really move freely. And I wanted to give a background. So maybe some of the people on this call, they were participating in this Open Streets Exchange for African Cities that happened in 2018, organized by Open Streets Cape Town. But really it brought together activists from around the continent and transport experts and urban researchers, and people like myself were excited to create something like open streets in their cities. And here I met a couple of the people that are standing under the chalk drawn map of Africa, who were from Addis Ababa, actually part of the city administration, and worked for the transport management agency, the traffic programs management office. This was really helpful because it was this immediate sort of alliance with civil society and the city administration, but in a really relaxed and friendly atmosphere where we really saw each other as equals and as friends, most importantly. And this whole exchange was really a space for how can we really learn to implement open streets in different African cities, and what are the in and outs and all the implementation that needs to take place. And this was actually led by a really good friend who's from Colombia, where the open streets movement started in the 1970s. So they have this 50-year trajectory of opening over 100 kilometers of streets for people. So this was an amazing way to learn how we can use this South-South exchange to really create open streets in Addis Ababa and across Ethiopia. So I went back to Addis now with these new connections, and we started forming sort of like a collective of organizers from different city bureaus, research centers, civil society. We would meet every single Wednesday forever to sort of create what would become Mangalleso, and that alliance was everything we needed. And so this is a photo of one of the locations of Mangalleso, where people are filling the streets. This happens once a month on a Sunday. And the whole idea behind this movement is to transform urban Ethiopia into a place that is socially connected, because we're seeing so much economic stratification, I think, in a lot of African cities, and more urban divide. So this is a space where we bring everyone together on the street, one that is ecologically sustainable, because we've seen, I mean, in Addis Ababa, the air pollution levels can be through the roof. And so trying to create a space where we're actually using active mobility, which is the way the majority of people in Addis Ababa moved, creating a prominent space for them. And that's powered by non-motorized mobility. So we want to create a capital city of Addis Ababa and in Ethiopia that's really redefining urban mobility and prioritizing the majority. In Addis, that is pedestrians and active transport and public transport users. And we want to really revive this indigenous culture. Jahan was mentioning, and hello, Jahan, I didn't say hi, was mentioning how there's a really dominance of active mobility in a lot of African cities. Obviously, this is not always out of choice, but out of economic necessity. So it's a really question of, okay, if this is how people are moving, how do we make it a priority and a safe and enjoyable way to move? So you had asked about a couple pictures of different streets. I know we'll look at this later, but this is a picture I took of Addis Ababa some 5 or 6 years ago. It's changing every single day. So it doesn't exactly look like this anymore, but you can see kind of the mix. There's a ton of cars, there's buses everywhere. There's one lone cyclist. There's some pedestrians going around. And really the question I wanted to ask in this picture is, what does it look like to make space for the majority? And that the question of streets and who they're designed for and who belongs to these places is ultimately one of justice and spatial justice. And so in Mangadlaso, we really want to challenge this notion that streets and public space must be for cars and instead demand that they must be for people. And this is at a moment where Addis Ababa is urbanizing so fast, and the entire country, the population is skyrocketing. We're chasing Nigeria right now for the second most populous country on the continent. And there's really adverse consequences for this with human health and safety and environmental contamination and air pollution, emissions levels. Even though we have low vehicle densities, we have really high traffic fatalities. So it's more than half of people in Addis Ababa that walk or that cycle. And in secondary cities, this can go up to 90% of the population. And then in Addis, around another 35% takes public transportation. But this is not reflected in the streets. Can you imagine 85% of the city does not have a private vehicle, but we're not designing streets and cities for 85% of the city. So it's really followed a car-centric model for a car-owning minority. And this obviously has really profound implications for spatial justice and for access to the city and for ecological health. And so basically, Mangadlaso is a model to say, why don't we flip this on its head and what could our cities look like if we did this? So I have a bunch of different photos from Mangadlaso where we're making this active majority really visible and really central. And this kicked off in late 2018, early 2019, and spread to a lot of cities across the country. And what it looks like in practice is that every month the streets are blocked off for people and not for vehicles. In Addis Ababa, we use a decentralized model. There's 10 different sub-cities, and across 7 of the 10 sub-cities, we block off around 15 kilometers of streets for people to walk and to cycle and to skateboard and to basically play in open space. And we have a really diverse organizing collective, like I was mentioning before, but also we invite a lot of different organizations that share our same model. So we've had Noble Cup, for example, they make reusable menstrual cups. We've had Hopeful River Project. They do a lot of work on cleaning waterways. We've had Addis Air, they're like a citizen science air quality monitoring network, et cetera. And we really want this to multiply and grow. And so this has taken place in other cities across Ethiopia. It's really spread nationally. So here's some more examples we've had in the bottom left. The Health Bureau gives free health testing for non-communicable diseases. So you really see that you have a much wider alliance than just people working on streets, and that you can really allow this to grow. And some more images here. I'm going to try and keep this fast because I don't know how much time I have left, but 1 minute. Okay, basically, I'll just skim through everything. Here's just some examples of sort of the coverage that it's gotten in national and international press to see that this is something that's really timely, whose time has come and is really desired by the community. So you can see some of these things. And then also during the pandemic, how much, people looked to open space as a lifeline to survive the pandemic and to be able to move throughout the pandemic. But we did not necessarily see the same results in different African cities. The top left piece, a vision for post-pandemic mobility in African cities, I wrote with 2 friends, Marcela from Open Streets Cape Town and Constant Kapuz in Nairobi. And it was really about highlighting some different examples in Addis and Kampala, in Nairobi, that were working to move these kind of temporary NMT strategies into more permanent examples. And my last 2 things I want to say, we've collaborated a lot during the pandemic. We co-organized the World Car Free Day Summit a couple years back, which was when I first met Olamide, and that there's been also a lot of policy work to increase the amount of pedestrian and cycling infrastructure in the country. So we really want to tap into that. And Mangadlaso was actually embedded in the local and national non-motorized transport strategies. And the last thing that I want to say, that is something that's going to be coming up soon, is that we're going to be working on a girls' bicycle club. Because even me, I've cycled, I'm Ethiopian Canadian, I've cycled in all of the cities I've lived. I was really afraid to start cycling when I moved to Addis 5 or 6 years ago. The pandemic changed that. I became more afraid of public transportation than I did of cycling on the streets of Addis. But I don't see other Ethiopian women cycling. I have one really good friend who's cycling. Beyond that, it's just men, and we want to change this dynamic. And there's really different barriers to women cycling. There's so much sexual harassment around women cycling, all these things. So we're going to be creating a dedicated space. I know there's examples also in Lagos and other African cities of creating space for girls to learn how to cycle. Maybe there was barriers they faced also when they were younger, but also even today. So that's something that we're working on. And I just want to leave you with this image around how we imagine public space, how we imagine streets. They don't have to be for a car-owning minority. They can be much more playful, equitable spaces for all. And I'm sorry I went over my time, but that's all I wanted to share. Thank you.
That's perfectly fine, Savvy. I think you gave some really good examples and a good start to like what a street space could be and how we are trying to somewhat forcefully reimagine what street spaces are. I mean, we're forcefully, but actually these things already exist in street spaces. It's just that we are kind of making it a bit more prominent. So I think that's really great. And just to say, we had our first car-free day, which was a very 400-meter road, but we had the first car-free day in Lagos. So you've set an example, and also, of course, there are other cities and countries that have done this, but Lagos is coming. We're starting as well. And of course, you also mentioned the Girls Bike Club, which is something that we started also in Lagos 2 years ago, and it's been going very well. So it's something that I think we need to think about in terms of where do women fit into this idea of NMT, non-motorized transport, and how can we make sure that they are safe and included in these discussions, as well as within the spaces as well. Thank you so much, Sebler. So now we're going to go to Baye. And I hope I'm going to say this right, Baye Chiksao. I hope I said it right. He's the president of the association Samwell, which is it's a bicycle association, or bicycle, it's not a club because it's bigger than a club, so I don't want to say club, but it's a bicycle association based in Dakar. And he's going to take us through some of the work that they're doing there. They've been around for a while, and I think they're doing not just in terms of advocacy, but the research part of it as well, which is really important. So I'm going to share his presentation myself, and he's going to speak. So Baye, please feel free to unmute and start while I upload your presentation.
Thank you, Olamide. Yes, it's the best, is the correct pronunciation. First of all, hello everybody. I am Baye Chiksao, the founder of Samwell. And thank you to be really indulgent about my English, because I am French in a French country, and our English is not good at all. So what is Samwell? When I was a student in France, Paris, I really see all the difference we have between our countries, between France and Senegal and Dakar and Paris, about the occupation of the streets, and how the citizens can live in the street and take place of what they want about. And when every time I come back in Dakar for vacation or trips, I see the gap we have between these two towns. So can you pass to the next? Thank you. So when I come back here in 2018 and 80, I see the work we have to do here in Senegal. Dakar in rush hour, I think it's the same in all big towns, but here it's really complicated, because the street is all about cars. I don't know if you can see in the middle of this picture, we can see a bicycle and a man walking through taxis. So it's really complicated, and we first have to work about these topics and communicate about it for the population and for the governors also. to take decisions and change this kind of life. So we first take photos of in the streets, like these photos, and the next one we can see a man working on the road place for cars, and the car is parking on the pedestrian walkway. So everywhere, even in the center of Dakar, in downtown, it's the same thing. So the occupation of the space is really complicated, and we work like in this picture. We propose, why not how to say that, try cycling paths. And we all know that cycling and pedestrian occupation is the same. When we fight for the cycling, we fight also for the pedestrian. So that's our work we try to do here. And we also put in place these actions about knowing how the people, what is their perception of occupation of the road and cycling. And we see that the population is really aware of all these things about the occupation of the street. They all know that it's not normal to work with the cars. It's dangerous, it's not safe, etc. So this study, we take it to the decider, like the Minister of Transportation, and they take decision to include pathways and in a new project here in Dakar of a bus. It's a BRT. I don't know if you know what is mean. It's a bus of with high I don't know how to say that. It's like tramway. So voilà. Donc so they decide to include pathway in this project, and it's really a good thing. We also have a lot of work about communication. We try to put on cyclists in spotlight, like this campaign. We go on in the street, and we have some photo shoot street, and we see that we have cyclists here in Dakar, but then there are no way we have to cycle without being in danger. So it was the purpose of this campaign. Donc also this is other thing we do here. It's to promote all activities, economic and social, related to the cycling here in Dakar. All the work is about to promote this way of transportation, but also it's a way to promote a lifestyle. We can say about how to ride a bicycle, how to repair a bicycle. All these actions we put in place since our debut, and other projects are coming. So actually we are a young association, and it's very interesting to participate in a webinar like that, and to learn what is how other countries the association are doing. So thank you, Olamide, for this invitation. I think my presentation was clear and you understand something. Thank you.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you, Baye. Yes, yes, I know I kind of forced your hand. I know you're not an English speaker, and I made you do this anyway, because I think a lot of the work that you're doing is quite important. And what drew me to the work that you guys are doing is the fact that you're somewhat collecting data, and a lot of, well, in Lagos, for example, we don't have this information. How many cyclists are there? I know that I'm comparing Lagos to Dakar, and our population is very different, but still, even within a local government, these things are important when it comes to advocacy, to say, okay, we actually need these cycle lanes here because we have 100 people cycling, or we have children cycling to school, or things like that. And so it's really, I find it quite intriguing, the work that you guys are doing in Dakar, because we haven't, I think within our own advocacy, not just LUDI, but in terms of NMT advocacy, we haven't got to that level where we are collecting the data ourselves. So thank you so much, Baye. And of course, we'll come back to you when we have, when we talk about the photographs and look at the photographs that we'll be doing in the next session. So now we have Roland Postma, who is the organizational coordinator for the Young Urbanists South Africa and the head of Change for Electric Life Rides. He actually has a longer bio, and he does about 15 things I saw, but I'll leave it to you. I just highlighted 2, but I'll leave it to you to maybe talk a little bit more about what you're doing in South Africa. And I know you said you want to take off your video, so if it starts getting spotty, feel free to take off your video.
Hi everyone, and to those who will see this later, I'm going to take off my video because my internet is very bad. I do apologize. I can't blame ESCOM, it's just where I am at the moment. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to quickly talk about the work of Young Urbanists and touch on the things that the two panelists just talked about: open street space, cycling, and how do we transition our dependency away from private cars, and how that affects our land users and our communities. So apologies. Just to confirm, everyone can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Brilliant. So, I mean, I didn't have a presentation prepared, so I do apologize. So I thought and everyone can see my screen?
Yes.
Brilliant.
Yes.
I think that's a matter of what our ages when it comes to Zoom, there's always kind of that assurance that either someone can hear you or we can see what we're saying. But essentially, just like all the other panelists, we are very passionate about how we look at spaces, and considering we, especially like South Africa, that has a variety of crises that stem from national government, we as a civil organization want to give kind of solutions to local governments, municipalities and metros around how can we actually use space to contribute and solve our problems. And that's what we've been doing. So we're all about communication, about community connections, and then education, and then also change. So we want to kind of give capacity, but also communicate on the ideas that we talk about. Africa is rapidly urbanizing. And so essentially what that means is how we design every street, every development going forward will dictate or set the tone of what kind of continent we are. Are we carrying? Are we walkable? Are we climate friendly? These things affect everything. So that's why I think for us as a civil society, and those in academia or in the private sector or in the public sector, we really need to work together and very fast to shape our public narratives and to really reshape these spaces and also use what we have. I think we should, I don't want to see any smart city in my lifetime, and we should build what we have and retrofit. And we can talk about that later, but I'm not going to go into that. So what we do is we kind of bring capacity. One of the things that we do is there was a public proposal for a coastal upgrade, but it included formalizing a piece of land between a train station and the ocean. As you can see where my mouse goes, there's the train station. So the Southern Line is finally returning. So we actually have brand new trains, apologies. Still not the best frequency. There's added security. But the city of Cape Town still wants to build a car park and kind of affirm our dependency on cars. Now, of course, we understand people need parking, but I think we really want to shift the narrative of, can we perhaps reimagine that space as something else other than a car park? We had a very talented architect, UCity. So this is a proposal. As you can see, it's a big car park between the train station and the ocean. And what we did actually is we actually reimagined that space, and then we urged the public to comment, because the City of Cape Town had an open process, and we urged them to comment and to really reimagine that space. So that's some of the work we do. So we kind of give practice and give support to both our community and the public at large. Those are some of the things we're doing. We have a very strong relationship with the City of Cape Town, where we have a partnership with the Mayor's office that's called the Urbanizing Mobility Forum. So through these kind of forums, we're able to actually connect young people, especially to decision makers, to the mayor, and so forth. Last topic we had was around restoring our urban waterways and wetlands, and we applied this monocle of urban mobility and urban design. Because again, what's the holistic picture? Yes, it's about mobility, but how does mobility affect our land uses, our communities? How do we create a street, a neighborhood, a city for our people? That's the opportunity, and we really want to force those conversations, and also force people to think on a transversal level. So that's some of the things we do. Now, we don't like reacting to problems. We like thinking and dreaming and working towards a better city. But unfortunately, what we've been having to force and face is things being removed, like, for example, in the waterfront, which is an area in Cape Town that's actually very pedestrian friendly. There's actually removed a pedestrian crossing between the CPD and the waterfront. And this pedestrian crossing allowed to give pedestrians priority over cars, and cars complained, and they've removed it. There was no public consultation. So we as an organization react to that, and we try to give capacity and support. Now, well, this is very unfortunate, because we actually need more of these pedestrian crossings, not less. But this is the reality we have. It's very important to look at what is the power dynamics, and then also to kind of communicate what are the benefits of cycling and more walking. South Africa, for example, is a walking nation, actually, despite our very car-centric approach since the 50s, and especially in the democratic paradigm. In a democratic paradigm, we have proliferated urban sprawl and mallification and developments just for cars. So it's very important to note that as a country, especially from the national government, we have put cars and fear and architectural fear over the country we want to be. So we're in a situation where we have great policies from national government, especially the National Development Plan, but if you look at the reality of the build form, it's a vast, stark difference. So we want to bridge that gap. Why do we have these policies as a country, but we still put fear and car and urban sprawl over anything else? So we really want to bridge that gap because we have great policies, but we don't implement them as a city, whether it's the City of Cape Town, whether it's provincial government or national government. Now, there has been change, but change is happening slowly. We've been 20 years or more than 20 years in our democracy. But the great thing is we can have these conversations. We have freedom of media, freedom of political affiliation, mobility. We have rights as a country. So for us, it's important to recognize that we need to look at alternative ways, and perhaps we can't wait for rail to return properly, but we can do other things. We can build cycling highways. We need to ditch paint as a form of protection for cycling lanes. So we need to build segregated barriers, but also build a cycling lanes that are part of a bigger network. For example, the City of Cape Town's cycling policy calls for 8%, only 8% of commuting by 2030 to be as form of cycling. Now, the City of Cape Town does not know how many people are commuting. They actually don't even recognize that plan, despite it being their own plan. So that's a situation where we're facing, where we have kind of very kind of dinosaur-like, sorry for my French, I hope this is not being recorded, kind of very kind of conservative, technocratic people in power that don't believe we need to shift demand. And they usually blame national governments, and rightfully so, but there's so much we can do. Recent announcements that we had was the City of Cape Town, this was this week, they're going to stop key services for My City. My City is our BRT system. And I can't find the article. No, it's not yet, but anyhow, but they're going to slash services because of rise in fuel prices caused by the war in Ukraine and other issues. So we're really not shifting demands, and we're not creating alternative ways for our citizens, despite half of the city not owning a car and us really having a transportation crisis where most of us are reliant on taxis, and taxis are not subsidized at all. So we're really walking on thin shells here. But as the youth, we have the solutions, and we work with the policymakers, and we work with media to change the narrative and also to change the reality out there. But as an NPC, we struggle with resources, we struggle with help, we struggle to communicate our message because we need the public behind us. We need a bottom-up approach. So this is the reality we are. We are trying our best, and we really look up to people north of us doing and work they're doing. And yeah, I mean, I don't have anything else to say than, believe in yourselves and believe in a better country. And we need to take ownership of every street or every space we redevelop and use what we have. Please don't build any smart cities. And also paint is not infrastructure. I think that's the message I want to leave us with. And also for us to really question, what's the African dream? What's the South African dream? Is it, having a big house with cars, or is it something that's inclusive, walkable, climate-friendly, caring? So really, what's the narrative, and force us to use what we have and retrofit. We can do this tomorrow, and we need to work together and also bring all our forces together. Africa's urbanizing, and will be youth-led, and the livability of the world will dictate what happens on this continent. So we really have a big mission ahead of us, and I look forward to working with you guys in the present and the future. And that's it, really.
Great, thanks so much, Roland. You gave us a good overview, not just of what you're doing, but also of the issues around non-motorized transport and people kind of walking and using public space. But I really love what you said in terms of using creativity, because you guys are really you're already doing this reimagining. You're already being innovative and being creative about how you're thinking about public space, but you're using what already exists on the ground. So I think that's a really great kind of step, or a call to action for all of us to kind of use or do. And I love what you said about ownership as well, like who owns public space, or who owns a street space, and the fact that we need to take ownership, because sometimes we're not sure who owns it, so we leave it. But actually we should take ownership so that we can actually, create something that we as a community want. And I think that's really great. And then also in terms of vision and narrative, I think that's really important, because what you have in policy is not necessarily going to be converted into what we want as a vision of our cities, of our communities, of our countries. So I think we've got to kind of bring those two together and make sure that we're implementing what we actually really want to see in the future. Great, thank you so much, Roland. And last but not least, we have Tolula Oni, who is the public health and physician and urban epidemiologist, principal of Oni et al. And the founder of Urban Better. And she's going to talk a little bit more about her work and her affiliations, because she also has about 15 as well. So it'd be great to hear more about what you're doing, in those contexts, as well as in other work that you're doing with the University of Cambridge. Great, thank you.
Thank you, Olamide. It's been so great to hear what the other panelists are doing. Really, really love all your work. I'm going to come at this from a slightly different angle and talk about public spaces, public health infrastructure. I'll tell you a little bit about what I mean by that. So this is the first slide, and if you take nothing else from this, I want you to take what I will end up with in this slide. And this is essentially showing the ways that public space influence health. So we've kind of alluded to it in terms of active travel and physical activity, but there's so many different ways. So if we think about access to safe public space, be that blue space, green space, gray space, It can directly foster connectedness and community, support physical activity that's either for travel, transport, or leisure, or others. It can reduce injury and safety risks. It can even give us, inform and shape our access to healthy eating. Now, when we think about health, we often think about disease and think about these spaces, but we rarely go upstream and say, okay, if we're actually going to tackle these, there are good bang for our buck ways of thinking about this. And healthcare access, whilst a critical part of health, is only one part. And you can see this is but one. And if you trace it back, the access to public space is such a fundamental part of shaping of health infrastructure. So I come at this from thinking about public space really as really critical infrastructure. The other thing I will highlight in my talk is well, three things. One, to showcase why we need to show both increase and show existing demand for healthy places. Two, the importance of thinking about how we increase the supply of health from place. And this is supported by this image here, where we say if we actually wanting to create a healthy population, increasing the supply of health is not just thinking about healthcare, it's not just thinking about hospitals. We actually have to think about public space as a critical way of increasing our supply of health. And really importantly, and a couple of the panelists have alluded to this, the importance of data. We can't change what we do not measure, and we don't know what works if we don't measure it. Just coming a little bit back again to from the health risk factors perspective and thinking beyond healthcare, one of the great opportunities, somebody alluded to it earlier, that we as a continent very early on in our urbanization journey. The other thing that is unique to this continent is how young the population is. So the median age, so 50% of people on the African continent are 19 or under, and it drops down to even younger in cities, in many cities, as predominantly people, cities are an attraction for young people. So we know that when we talk about economic productivity, we talk about development of these people are critical. But from a healthcare perspective, what we're seeing and the trajectories we're seeing, that if we don't bend that trajectory, very soon the majority of this young population will have diseases like non-communicable diseases. I'm talking about diabetes, hypertension, strokes, musculoskeletal diseases, things that reduce their ability to live to their full potential. And we're actually starting to see this occurring at earlier and earlier ages. This is a huge cost of concern. And we will never increase the healthcare enough to address it, because the implications of trying to chase our tails in that way will just be crippling. So really prevention is so central, and that's why that image, why I showed that image. As a health behavior, I want to zero in on physical activity in the context of public space, so that physical activity line in the first image as being critical for physical and mental health. So we know it's one of the leading risk factors for many diseases, from cancers to mental ill health, to diabetes, etc. We think about physical activity as occurring across these 4 different domains. So we're trying to think about, are we trying to support recreational physical activity, travel related, occupational, or domestic? And it's worth noting that over and above the impact, the positive impact on health of physical activity, we know that leisure-related physical activity has additional health benefits, both physical and mental health. So it's important that we're, yes, talking about transport-related, but also thinking about recreation as a really critical part of human development. And we talk about public space for physical activity because it's the most equitable space for physical activity. So we know we want people to be physically active. Saying things like, oh, join a gym, it's like, well, that's not an inclusive approach. Public space is by definition public. So when we're thinking about population level approaches to doing this, public space is the most obvious way. And this wheel just shows that health is really, and physical activity in public space really as a center of a lot of the sustainable development goals that we are also trying to achieve. So I'm going to give you this in 2 parts in the next few minutes. But first, I'll show you some of the results that we found from our literature review we did. So we actually scoured the literature, not just academic literature, but also grey literature, what's online, what's in policy reports, what's in published reports from NGOs, to look at the kinds of public space interventions primarily focused on health, and particularly looking at physical activity as a behavior important for non-communicable diseases, because we wanted to understand what is already known. As much as we need to improve, it's important that we don't dismiss the progress that has been made. So I'll show in the next few slides what we found. Firstly, we found that there's these interventions, as they're published. I recognize that many interventions are not published, and this is actually one of the important reasons why it's important to put what we do out there. And this is comes back to data, right? Data is also documenting what we do, because if we don't document, we don't learn from, and we repeat the same mistakes. So from what is out there, we see non-even distribution of interventions, really skewed towards South Africa here. The common settings for spaces that public spaces that are used are what you see here. So schools are an interesting setting for public space intervention, parks, gardens in communities, residential areas. As you can see, there's some open space that are otherwise unused, green space, etc. So that gives you a sense of the types of things that are already being used. How are people navigating these public spaces for health? So this is some examples. There have been ad hoc activities in residential communities, sort of gardening. And with that project that was done in Cameroon, there were more scheduled events, like a structured football program that also combines physical activity with life skills, as this project in South Africa using sports for development shows. We looked at who were the kind of commonly cited collaborating partners, and maybe to the people on this is not a surprise. So it's sports associations, academic organizations, international organizations, community groups, and government. This is one example of the green space in the context of thinking about biodiversity and also thinking about recreation and physical activity that was done in Durban in South Africa, looking at ways that the communities can conceptualize and use green spaces in their neighborhoods for not just recreation, and not just aesthetics, but also thinking about preserving biodiversity. And then lastly, I think the commonly cited impacts of thinking about what are the ways in which people see these public spaces in infrastructure impacting on health is what we see here. So what I've alluded to, nutrition, actually physical activity, poverty reduction, ecological conservation, but also looking at it as a health education, social cohesion, etc. So that's the first thing I just wanted to highlight and show some of what we know is out there, and from a data perspective there, emphasize the importance of documenting our experiences as we go. The second part of this and last part is thinking about citizen science and the importance, and this again is part of thinking about documenting, but also engaging the majority demographic as being part of understanding the situation, but also the solution. So I'm going to show you two quick projects. The first is a study that we did in Lagos and in Lagos, Nigeria, in Yaoundé in Cameroon. So we wanted to understand how people were using public space for physical activity. We know that it's not just in ways that are that public spaces are planned for. I'm a runner and I've kind of run through places and I've seen how people use public spaces in ways that they're not initially designed. So I was thinking, well, if we're going to actually create more conducive public spaces for physical activity, yes, we know there is not enough of it, but we can also take an asset-based approach to say, well, what is already going on? What are the ways that people are appropriating public space for physical activity? What are the health risks that they face? And how can we, as a way of increasing access to the space, start by supporting people who are already doing this? And what we saw was really a tale of unmet demand. So we saw car parks, actually interesting car parks are outside stadiums. So you think a stadium is an area that has physical activity in public space, but often those were access controlled. So people were kind of doing sit-ups, or I didn't put that one here. There was like sit-ups or whatever aside a car park right by exhaust fumes. We saw someone doing planks on a bridge. So appropriation in public spaces is actually around the lockdown when in Lagos, when streets were closed and people took to the streets to be physically active, just really showing. So when people say, oh, like Roland alluded to, oh, we didn't think there's not really much demand for pedestrians. We need to show that there is unmet demand and that people actually want this. We saw under bridges, around roundabouts, along canalways with exposure to pollution, etc. These are some of the risks that we asked them. So by the way, the approach that we took to this is we put it out in the public with WhatsApp groups and social media to say, tell us about public spaces that are being used around you, either by you or that you've seen being used, right? So we had an app that then people could take a picture and tell us, okay, people normally do this sort of thing there, and these are the risks, etc. So this is the kind of thing to say it's dangerous because it's in the middle of an expressway, but it's still a space. I think we can do better. I'll end with this because I can't see that's a message, but I'm sure it's telling me I'm out of time. Another example of citizen science is running experiments we've been doing in a few cities. And this was the idea for this is in the context of thinking about health risks, air pollution, and somebody alluded to it early on, is a really critical health risk in public space. So if we want people to be physically active, we have to make sure these spaces are conducive. So it's not just safety and injury, but air quality. And I started trying to understand, well, what is the quality of air? And I realized that there was very little, if at all, being measured in most of our cities. This is an example of a cycle we did in Kisumu in Kenya with a Kisumu Bicycle Club there, and this is the air quality monitor. So they've been doing a lot of advocacy for cycling infrastructure, and they didn't know what quality of air they breathe. This is a really critical part of advocacy. So we developed this project called Citizens for Clean Air. It's been run in Cape Town, in Accra, and in Lagos. They recruited people aged 18 to 35 to they train for a couple of days, they design run routes, they measure the quality of air on their running routes, and they take pictures as they go to say, well, this is the experience. We bring that together and then use that information to design advocacy campaigns. So these are the run leaders in Cape Town, Accra, and Lagos. And just I will show you something when I close here, but I want to show, because Olamide mentioned the Lagos Car Free Day that LUDI and other NGOs in Lagos organized last weekend with the Lagos state government. So some of our run leaders there in Lagos organized a run to measure the air quality along the running route when there were no cars around, because they ran last week with cars around. And I'm sorry I can't show you those results, but just on that stretch that where the car free day was, the air quality was better the second week the weekend when there were no cars. So these are the kinds of ways that data can be really powerful. I just want to end with, if you just allow me to show you what the platform looks like and why it could be important. So this is so I told you they run with air quality monitors, and you can see we have a platform here where you can say, okay, let's show what the air quality is. You can zoom in a particular run, and you can see what that is. You can see what media was collected. Just give it a moment. So you can say, okay, this was the health risk that was identified, and this was why, so the risk of injury there. Or you can see here, if we zoom in a little bit, this is a source of clean air because it's by the ocean, etc. So at a glance, you can see the kinds of ways that the public can use information to advocate, to say, even within the city, where the sources of clean air, where the source of polluted air, where the access to healthy space or not, and how can we actually have evidence-informed activism to drive change. So I'll end there. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Tulula. That was really, really good. And I think it kind of touched on a lot of different things. You've of course brought in the health aspect, which is very important when we're thinking of quality of life. And so that's really great. And especially, if you think about the public health facilities, this is for Lagos. I can't talk about all the other cities, but for Lagos, they're not up to par. So if we can curb this kind of health issues at the source or at the beginning before they even start, from young children and so on. I think that really, that helps already when thinking about, where the budget is going in terms of healthcare, but also let's put it in public space, because it actually will help in terms of reducing health risks, for different health risks. So I think that's, and thank you so much for bringing that aspect into this. And of course, you mentioned about data, the importance of data again. And I love the fact that you guys are doing a citizen-led kind of data process. So it's not just about, researchers or the people that know going in there to kind of, and collect the data, but how can, as you said, how can you as an individual collect data and, do some kind of activism towards a better city, or a better kind of wherever you live, community. And then again, last thing, just to touch on something that you mentioned, was this unmet demand, and how, and I think for me, this is my big takeaway from all the conversations, is that we are already somewhat reimagining or reappropriating street spaces. However, the policies or the laws are not taking into account what is already in existence. So how do we kind of bring those two together? So thank you so much to all the panelists. I hope the attendees or the participants also got a lot from what they said. So the next part of this webinar is that we're going to go into a discussion. So I'm going to show a variety of different images, and we'd love for the panelists to comment on the images. I'll ask a couple of questions, but also this is a point where the participants can also come in and share their own ideas and share their own thoughts. So let me first put the first image, and then I'll ask a couple of questions, and then we can reflect on those questions. And just to say, hold on one second. So just to say that 4 of those images were part of the Rise Africa photo competition, the Rise Africa 2022 photo competition. So I'll tell you each who produced each image. But first, let me try and share my screen. There we go. Great. Can everybody see the image? I would love to make it full screen, but then I won't be able to see the questions. So I'll ask the questions first, and then I'll try and make it full screen. And again, please, to the participants, please also share your thoughts. And if you have, if you can raise your hand as well, because this is supposed to be quite interactive, and not just for the panelists to contribute, but also for the participants. So let me ask the questions now. So this image was actually produced by, I think, Papa Omotayo. So it wasn't part of the Rise Africa competition, but it was for a project that we did on public space. And so what I would like the participants and everybody to reflect on is, what do you see? What strikes you about the image? How is public space being used? What can be done differently to make this space more inclusive, safe, and accessible? And then how does it contribute to creating more equitable, healthy, people-centered, and sustainable cities? And of course, any advocacy that we could do, or any policy recommendations to make some change within these streets. So I will call on the panelists first, but if you have any comments, please raise your hand. So I'll go in the order that we had, which was Sebler first. So please go ahead and unmute. Any comments, thoughts, ideas that spring to mind on this image? And this is from Lagos, by the way. They're all from different cities.
Okay, I didn't know where it was actually. Well, I guess from the photo, I see a lot of street vendors, and then a lot of private vehicles, and some pedestrians on the street. I mean, I think it's nice that there's a thriving local economy happening here. And I think, yeah, it seems that the street is overtaken by private vehicles, and it seems potentially like it's close to a school, because some people seem to be wearing a school uniform. So I know there's been some initiatives to do these school streets where there's certain hours where students are leaving schools, where it's blocked off just for kids to be able to go safely on their route home. or to school. So maybe there could be like something temporary that's implemented that makes this street safer for the children who are crossing. And potentially removing the parking that I see on the far left, so that that can be a walkway or something like this, so not everyone has to be on the street.
Great, thanks, Sebler. Thanks. Good start to the conversation and good contribution. So I'll hand over now to Baye. Baye is still there?
Yes.
Oh, great.
I don't know if I can add something to what Sebler just say. I didn't notice the students, so I think this path is near of a school. I see a little market, some vendors. Yes, I think the car is the problem here. So if they can have a longer way parking over there and walk to the market or walk to the school. We have double line parking here. It's very, very, very problematic, and the street in rush hour, it's very nervous to road in this to have car in this road.
Exactly, it's a lot of congestion, right? Totally agree. Thanks, Baye. So anything you want to add there, Roland?
Sorry, I just got a message from the mayor. Apologies. I mean, look, I think I completely agree with all the initial comments. It's how do we repurpose? I mean, you can see, cars. I mean, we can't build without congestion. So maybe, I mean, I agree with all the comments. So I think I'm probably going to go more on the land using, perhaps increase the density. But I mean, the space can be, to repurpose that whole public space. And if this can be a cycling lane, make sure it's a barrier, segregated cycling lane. But it's hard to kind of comment about the bigger context of the street, so the whole kind of neighborhood. But definitely agree, it looks colorful, it looks vibrant, but let's definitely use more of that public space, road space.
Great, thanks, Roland. I lost you a bit at the end, but I think we got what you were saying. Thank you. And Tolula, do you want to add something?
Yeah, a couple of things, right? So the two things I would add to what's been said is, one, looking at the kind of fresh fruits that are being sold, and two, looking at the colorful umbrellas. So it reminds me that, that market, the way that the public space is set up, the market has had to appropriate the pedestrian space in order to sell. And in many cities they create this false tension between, oh, we need people to walk, so we get rid of the markets. It's like, well, the markets are there because people need them to be there, right? So we need to actually think about space that accommodates that. And the reason why it's that false dichotomy is set up is because the one thing that is gospel and not changeable is the car space. If you thought about the whole space as changeable, you'd design the space differently. So that's the first thing. I think it's important. A lot of people are walking alongside the road by the market because they can't walk on the market. But the solution is not to get rid of the market, I don't think. So that's one thing. The second thing I just want to highlight with the umbrellas is the heat, right? And the context of climate change, right? So if we're talking about public space, it doesn't have to be hard. Like, there is some aspect of resilience, quote unquote, that I struggle with, because it's a bit like, oh, we're here, we put this up. It's like, why is it okay for it to be hard? We know we'll have much more frequency of extreme weather events, extreme heat, flooding, and that sort of thing. In the context of the fact that we need this healthy foods that are being sold there to be there, if we're not thinking about climate resilience in the context of that public space, what happens when there is extreme heat and they can't sell, or their health is at risk, or what happens, etc. So I think that element of climate is important. And then the last thing maybe to mention of the people who are selling actually is they're at work. So there's there's people walking and that sort of thing, but there's also an occupational risk of sitting there in the context of breathing that air. We see that for traffic wardens, we see that for that sort of thing, where they're not moving, right? They're sitting in that space. So it's also thinking about occupational health. And the importance of, because these people often are important breadwinners for their household. So yeah, that's what I would add to what's been said.
Amazing, thanks. That's really great. And I didn't even think of the climate resilience. We did this kind of exercise with some other people, and actually no one really thought of that climate resilience aspect, or even heat, because it's one of the things that we talk about when thinking of building walkways in the Lagos context, and making sure there's like a canopy. But then I completely didn't think about this in this context. So that's really great. Thanks for that. And thanks everybody. So we'll go to the next photo, because I know I'm going to try to be on time and finish on time so that we don't dwell too much. So we'll go to the next one. So let me tell you a bit about this photo, where it is. Here we are. Okay, this is Kinshasa. And this is by Herman Kasingu. Sorry if I've said your name wrong. I know he's not here, but still. Herman Kasingu, and this is Kinshasa. So again, we'll just go in that order with Sebler first, or do we want to mix it up? And maybe Roland go first, because Roland did say he has to leave at in about 5 minutes. So maybe Roland can go first for this photo.
I mean, I see so much bustling and activity. So I would, I think, to keep the street as it is, but introduce greenery. I think that's the first comment that I see, is the lack of, to those points, climate change, mitigating the urban heat effect, having spaces for people to sit. So I would really actually leave the space as is, but really try to include greenery and interwoven into that space. But that picture, I mean, yeah, I think it can't get better. You don't need to formalize it. I think the informality of it gives so much richness and such a strong utilization of space. So I really think perhaps more lightening and more greenery to make it more safe space, and especially I think for young people, old people, females. So I think that will be the conversation there. But taxis, and all those other things are a critical part of that makes Africa actually livable, in absence of proper public transportation. So yeah, that'll be my comments. I mean, yeah. And where's this? This is Lagos, or?
No, this is Kinshasa.
Okay, wow. I want to go. Yeah, that'll be my comment. Thanks, guys. And after right, so I do apologize. Thanks so much for the opportunity. I'll leave a comment on the chat. Thanks.
Thanks, Roland. So let's go to Abaye maybe at this point. I mean, I really love this scene as well. I picked it because it was a really great kind of nighttime. It just shows that how diverse city can be, daytime, nighttime, and how kind of hustle, bustle, and kind of colorful the city can be. So Abaye, do you want to add anything else? Abaye, are you still there? Okay, while we wait for Abaye, maybe we'll go to Tolu.
Yeah, I see public transport, which is good, right? Because then that's shared transport. I see two-wheelers, which is an addition from the previous. I think in that context, two-wheelers in many cities are really important health issue with respect to both injury risk and air pollution. So given that this is public transport, and in fact a lot of the two-wheelers are also part of public transport, there's an opportunity to think about that transport infrastructure in terms of the cleanliness of the vehicles that are on the road, and the potential for that to improve the experience of being on the road. So there's a lot more we can do in terms of vehicle standards being enforced in our cities. I like the light and green comments that Roland mentioned. I think the other thing I would say, and I don't know how, it's not formalizing, but there is there is an injury risk here, right? So how do we kind of thinking innovatively about how to manage that, let's say, without prescribing solutions, because people are there because I can't quite work out if it's a transport hub, and so people are waiting for transport, or people are on their way en route somewhere. So depending on what it's used for, thinking about how to reduce that risk of injury from the vehicles. But it is nice to see in that snapshot fewer private cars than public transport.
Great, thanks, Tolu. And Sebler, do you want to add something?
Yeah, well, I'm loving the nightlife. I think it's exciting how filled the street is, and also as a woman, streets that are filled at night always feel much safer to me. So I think that's a really wonderful factor in the picture here. It also feels like many traffic jams in Addis Ababa, where if there's not like a traffic officer in the middle, you will stay there for a long time until someone volunteers themselves to make the traffic flow, which is a test on everyone's finite patience. So I think if there can be some sort of organization here, because everyone is going so many different directions, and I feel like this is the epitome of, we have really low vehicle densities and high traffic fatalities in this image. And also if like there can be some sort of protected area for the pedestrians, because I feel like there's a sea of people walking outwards on the far right of this photo, but they're like up against the minibuses and all these things. So yeah, so how that can be like just flowing in a safer way. And I feel it would also flow like more smoothly if there was not all of this going on. Yeah, that's it.
Great, thank you. And Johan, did you want to add anything? Because I see a comment there.
Yeah, I did also make a comment, and I think it's around, I see so often when it comes to public space, it's this idea of like fencing it for safety. And so you're already creating a barrier to access this public space. And so how can we redesign our public space? It still includes safety in different ways, but that still allows people to access it and move through and walk across and use that space. I think that's something that's really important, and I see that so often. So that's all I wanted to add. I also see that Sophia put her hand up. Let me just see.
Sophia, I don't know if we have to unmute you or you can unmute yourself.
I just unmuted or allowed her to speak. So I think you can unmute, Sophia.
Okay, great.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so actually this picture is very interesting, and for my side, I think I go along with Sebler. She actually mentioned a lot of things about the pedestrian safety. And what I can see from this picture, I can see that it looks like it's a public transport. It's like a bus stand, because I can see the big buses on the left side, as well as the mini buses on the right side. And it looks like there are private cars in the middle. So that means this place misses the correct organization. And if you can look closely, the roads don't have markings. There is no zebra crossing. The indication showing that what is happening here, you can see cars moving from the left side, others moving towards the car coming from the right side, other cars going to the left side. So I do think more the street signs, the road signs should be given here, maybe a clear indication for where the pedestrians should stay, where the walkways should be, and where these buses should, how they should be moving, because it looks like it's a one-side movement. Like all the buses are coming from the farther side to this side. So it looks like it's a one-way. That's all I can say. Thank you.
Thanks, Sophia. Thank you so much for adding that. Yeah, it does looks like quite chaotic. All right, so let's try to go to the next one. Okay, so this is Kigali. Let me tell you who did this one. This is Sharifu Bigirimana. I hope I said that right. I'm so sorry, but this is Kigali. So so I chose one that we can all look at. Oh, this is lovely. But I guess this is kind of a like city center, because it looks like there's some banks and so on, and then there's some walkways and some seating. So we'll go to Sebler first. Go ahead.
Okay, well, I've also been to Kigali and I did really like it. Much more tame than Addis. I think, I mean, the space, it looks a bit empty, I guess, but it's nice that there is all this public space. Maybe it's the middle of the workday and that's why people are not there. And the trees will grow. They're not there yet providing shade for everyone, but it's nice that there's been so much like pedestrianized public space created. Maybe there can be a way that they put like a little bit more liveliness in it, if there's some art and culture interventions or like water fountains or just things that can maybe bring people into the space more. But it is certainly very nice to have all the open space for people who walk or maybe cycle or things like this.
Yeah, I think that's a good point actually, about how to activate street space as well. Yeah, good point. Baye, it's Baye, because I can't see his name anymore, so I hope he's still here. Yes, Baye, do you want to say something about this space?
Yes, I try to speak to before the previous picture, but I can't. This one, it's really nice to have all this space in the center of a city, and it's not the same thing in every big city. So it's a good thing to have walkway wide at this with this dimension. So I really appreciate this type of management.
Great, thanks, Baye. And I'm actually going to use this as some advocacy for Lagos Island, because Lagos Island is very similar in terms of commercial activity, and we have narrow streets because it was an old part of Lagos. And we're always advocating to make some of those streets pedestrian only. And so this would work quite well in that kind of context. Not of course on every street, but in some streets this could work quite well. So yeah, I agree. By Tolu, do you want to add anything?
No, just that I like the Sebler's point is a good one, that the trees are young, right? So I was trying to think about the cover and the kind of the shade, which is an important one, and that it's not, sometimes thinking about pedestrianized spaces, we think about just walking and passing through. That person on the on the chair most proximal to us just looks so comfortable and so chilled and so kind of like owning that space. There's some aspects of thinking about the different ways. For me, what stands out for this is, yes, apart from the fact that it's pedestrianized, but they've considered different ways that people use the space. So there's kind of like, you're not just passing through, you're also stopping, and you're meeting. It actually reminds me of something I just read, some evidence I just read on how the shape of even seating can influence how people use the space, right? So there was a study that was just recently published last week that showed that, particularly, I can't remember which, it wasn't in Africa, but it showed that particularly young girls prefer spaces, seating in public spaces where they can face each other. And that they tend to use it in that way because that's what they want to do. So when that isn't there, they kind of appropriate another type of space. So that, I thought that was really interesting, because I thought this is why you need to involve key demographics in the design of the space, because you could design something like, we put sitting now, what do you want? But actually it's like, what kind of seating do people need for kind of social connection, and those kind of nuances could actually make the space more inclusive. But this looks nice.
Great, fantastic. Jahan, do you want to add anything, or should we go to the last image?
I just wanted to add one more thing, and I think it's also just around, I know that there are trees and things, but perhaps a lot more green space, more grass, more place where you can take your shoes off and walk with your toes in the grass and things. So maybe more of that greenery and plants maybe would be really great as well. And then so I was there already, and I think at some point they had an exhibition there, which was really interesting. And then they also have kiosks for trading and things. But I wonder if they would create a bit of space for some kind of informal trade potentially, or for people to just be able to sell food in a different way than just have to utilize and rent a kiosk. So maybe having those different kinds of ways that people interact with these car-free spaces, it could be really interesting.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, really how to activate the space and make it, because food, everyone loves food. So if you have food kiosks there, I mean, everyone will be there probably. Okay, so the last one, and because we're also towards the end. Sorry. This is Peter Irungu, and this is Nairobi. And again, I think this touches on this idea of food and being sold, and the street space and the walking space. And then at the top, you kind of have the cars. So the photo was taken like this, but we can't see the cars, but we can see some of the tires and so on above. So I think, and then you can see there's a clear demarcation between the road and the walking, or maybe it's cycling, I don't know, but a walking space anyway. So I think I'll hand over to Sebler first.
I love it. I was going to say this photo's got soul. It looks like a place that I would want to be, because seems like there's a lot of like culture in the space, or like vendors of artisans or something like this. And then there's ways to move around the city that are protected from private vehicles. There's like food vendors too. And I see a lot of women, which is nice, because oftentimes it's men who dominate public space. So I generally really like this.
Great, thanks. Baye, and then we'll end with Tolu. Baye, are you able to unmute? Let me see if I can.
Yes, you hear me?
Yeah.
I didn't hear where this picture was taken, but it seemed to be Dakar. I see so many trash in the street. Yes, it seems it's the same thing in Dakar. All the vendors are in the street. People are throwing away their trash. So I think it's a little bit the same thing everywhere.
Thanks, Baye. Yeah, it's one of the things I picked up as well. And also for me anyway, it was also like there's no, even though there are vendors, there's no space to kind of just relax a little bit or sit for a little while waiting for, I don't know, whether public transport or other things. But Tolu, do you wanna say something else? Add anything?
Yeah, so I like the separation from the road, and what we've compared to the first photo, the space for both trading and walking. I think that's a kind of a good example of how they're not necessarily in competition. I wonder if the shadows that we can see come up are leaves, and I wondered about shade for them. I did look under the drainage there, I flagged waste management there, because if that isn't managed, then the risk of flooding and extreme weather, and then that compromising both the economic activity there, but also the ability to walk, and then that may push people onto the road if that's not addressed. So it's really seeing waste management and transport, waste infrastructure and transport infrastructure coming together, and as being interrelated is really, really critical. Yeah, but yeah, nothing else to add over that, other than, yeah, it's great to see that kind of activity and coexisting.
Thank you, Tolu. Thank you so much. And Jahan, before I ask the panelists to do like one last comment, maybe a little bit about like, how do we advocate for reclaiming or reframing? Do you want to add anything else?
No, I think it's fine. I think the reflections have been really great.
Okay, great. So so just for the last thoughts, because we have like 1 minute left. Last thoughts on how do we advocate for and change the mindset both for government and citizens around using road and street space differently. So if we could just go round, just one last comment from everybody. Maybe we'll start with Sebler, and then Baye, and then Tolu, and then we'll end with Jahan from ICLEI.
Okay, thank you. I would say you have allies in unexpected places and almost allies everywhere. We've been working a lot with the city administration, and they've been super excited about Mangar Leso, and I'm sure they will be also with the Girls Bicycle Club, because it taps into the goals they have for the non-motorized transport strategy for the city and the country. People can be a lot more resistant to permanent ideas. So you can first lead with pop-up ideas and imagine the space differently. And then without knowing it, they fall in love with these temporary proposals and want them to become even more long-term. And I think that's something that's important. We can help birth these ideas. And then it's important that these become institutionalized and have a very long life that goes beyond anyone's political term. And I think the best example is from Latin America, where we have 40, 50 years of open streets that really transcend anybody's political term. So really make connections with unexpected allies, and then you can start with little flashes or temporary pop-ups, and then that can create a much more permanent change in the city.
Great, thanks, Sebler. Thanks so much. Baye, just some last comments. Baye, are you still there? Maybe we've lost.
Yes.
Oh, back. Yes, great. Just some last comments about advocacy and how can we change mindsets.
Yes. About this, we are trying several formula, and we think the best way. Well, we are trying, but we see that the population are more aware to change than what we think, and when we directly propose solution to population, if they try it once, it's a better way to improve decision in for the governance. The bottom to the top, and when we in Samwell, that's what we try. An example, if in some pathway we put bicycle freely, people use it one day, the other day they ask about it. So we think it's very important to work with the population in the bottom to impose some decision for to the governors.
Great, thanks, Baye. And then Tolula.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the invitation again. 3 things. I think firstly, alignment. So importance of understanding what the opportunities are in the city, because we often think about it antagonistically, but sometimes the city is actually said they're going to do this, and it may not be where you're at the angle you want to come in. And I know this from health, it may become a different angle. You say, okay, that is what you want to do. What we're proposing is actually aligned with that. So I think that emphasizes the importance of knowing what the city's kind of aspirations and goals are and looking where to align. The second thing is amplifying what already exists. We sometimes take for granted, like, oh yeah, this happens, but no, that's not what we want. Like, actually, if you dismiss and you don't value the things that are good, we'll lose them, right? So I think the importance of reiterating what already exists and kind of giving that platform is really good. And then the third is exemplified by this platform, the importance of knowledge exchange in driving imagination of showing what is possible. Every city seems to think that their city is impossible and nothing can change. And then you see another city that is just as complex and they're trying this and you're like, oh, okay, if they can do it, it is possible. So it's really important, these sort of platforms, to learn what is possible and to reimagine the boundaries of what we can do with our cities. So that's my takeaway from this. So thank you very much for organizing this.
Great, thank you so much. And then I'm gonna thank you to all the speakers personally. I want to thank you all for agreeing to come on and talk to us and talk to me about the work that you're doing, and also share your thoughts, especially around, because obviously LUDI do a lot of advocacy around this. And as you said, knowledge exchange, it's very important. So thanks again to all the panelists. And so I'm gonna hand back over to Jahan, who started us off and is gonna close us off as well.
Thanks so much, everybody. This was such an insightful conversation and really interesting to hear the different perspectives. I think my key takeaway was really around, I mean, Tallulah mentioned about we can't change what we do not know. I think that's really important, collecting data and start using that as a starting point. Advocating for policies to really reflect what's on the ground. It's so critical. And linking road space mobility to health, well-being, quality of life, and having a narrative around that is so important. And really multi-stakeholder approach. I mean, there's so many stakeholders involved in creating space. So really, how do we open up collaboration spaces, and how can our local governments lead these spaces and bring these voices together to be able to create a shared narrative around the spaces in our cities. And yeah, so I'm going to end off with that. But thanks so much, everyone, for coming and for this conversation. This webinar has been recorded, so it will be uploaded online. And yeah, please do contribute to African Mobility Month. I've shared a little link in the chat. And yeah, it'd be great to hear more of these sort of stories as we advocate for change. Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye.